She thought she was forgotten until this day. She never liked hospitals. They always seemed to hum with a silence that wasn't really silence at all. Machines ticked faintly. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps clicked along the hallways. But underneath it all, there was a hush that reminded her of endings. Not the kind of quiet that comforted you, but the kind that pressed against your chest. At her age, she could not avoid them anymore. Checkups, prescriptions, reminders that the body does not last forever. That morning, she sat in the waiting room with her purse folded neatly on her lap. It was habit now, always folding her hands, always sitting straight, as if keeping order on the outside might keep her together on the inside. She glanced at the empty chair beside her. Empty chairs had become her companions. They were there at the dinner table, beside the couch, across the bed at night. Silence was her shadow. Sometimes she thought she had grown used to it. Other times, it startled her, like turning a corner and finding no one where you expected someone to be. Her eyes wandered to the television in the corner, muted, but flashing the morning news. She did not care for headlines. Her mind drifted elsewhere, as it often did when waiting. Waiting was dangerous. Waiting opened doors to the past, and the past almost always led to him. Daniel. His name lived in her memory like a note folded too many times, edges worn, ink faded but never erased. They had been young when they met, too young to know how fragile love could be. They had been fiery when they fought, too fiery to step back. And when pride built a wall between them, neither crossed it. Decades of silence grew where words should have been. Mrs. Carter? Her name startled her back. She looked up to see a nurse standing in the doorway, clipboard in hand. The nurse looked young, maybe mid-30s, but her eyes carried something older, something searching. The smile on her lips was polite, but her gaze lingered in a way that unsettled her. She followed the nurse down the corridor, past numbered doors, past the faint scent of antiseptic that clung to the air. Inside the exam room, the paper on the table crinkled loudly as she sat. The nurse asked the routine questions about sleep, about appetite. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes remained steady, too steady. Finally, Mrs. Carter asked quietly, "Why are you looking at me like that?" The nurse hesitated. Then she said softly, "You remind me of my mother." Mrs. Carter gave a dry, amused laugh. At my age, I remind everyone of someone. But the nurse didn't look away. Her voice dropped even lower. "No, you remind me of her exactly. My mother's name was Daniel Ross." The name struck like a bell. Daniel. For a moment, Mrs. Carter could not breathe. Her fingers tightened around her purse. Her eyes blurred. She had not heard that name in over 40 years. "You must be mistaken," she whispered. The nurse shook her head gently. "He passed away last year, but he never stopped talking about you." She didn't realize she was holding her breath until her chest began to ache. The nurse waited without rushing her, hands still. gaze steady, as if she knew that one name could undo 40 years of careful quiet. "He passed away last year," the nurse had said, "but he never stopped talking about you." Words like that have their own gravity. They pull you through corridors you thought were sealed, open rooms you swore you'd never enter again. For a long moment, she could only listen to the air, to the tiny machine beeping softly in the corner, to the faint whisper of footsteps moving somewhere beyond the door. She thought of all the evenings when she sat in her living room without turning on the television, letting the silence grow taller than the furniture. She had told herself she preferred it that way. It was safer to live among quiet objects than to walk back into memory and risk finding it empty. The nurse spoke again, not as a professional gathering information, but as a daughter who had also lost someone. "My father told me things," she said, not all at once. Little stories that slipped out when he folded laundry, or waited for water to boil, or sat by a window when the light was thin. He never used your full name, not at first. He'd just say, "I wonder how she is. I wonder if she got the life she wanted." And then sometimes he'd go quiet after that and pretend he hadn't said anything at all. People do that when love is larger than their courage. Mrs. Carter managed to ask the smallest question because small questions are the easiest to hold. "What did he say about me?" The nurse smiled the kind of smile that belongs to news you don't want to bruise. "He said you were the bravest person he had ever known. He said you could make a room feel safe just by standing in it. He said he was sorry he didn't learn sooner how to stay." The words landed with a weight that was not heavy so much as real. She remembered the narrow hallway where they had said the wrong things in the wrong order, both of them too proud to say the simplest words. "I'm frightened. Stay with me." She remembered the door closing. She remembered not knowing which of them had closed it first. The nurse shifted slightly, as if moving the conversation closer to something fragile. "There's something I'm supposed to give you." She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and brought out a small envelope, its edges softened by time. The paper had the look of weathered bone. She held it with both hands, as if it had a temperature. "He kept this," she said. "He wrote it after the two of you lost touch. He carried it through moves and jobs and seasons. He told me that if I ever met you, I should put it into your hands myself." Mrs. Carter did not take it right away. She looked at it the way you look at a photograph taken on a day that later turned out to be important. Then she lifted her palm and felt the envelope settle against her skin. For a second, she wondered if it would be better not to open it, to keep the letter the way he had kept it, sealed, full of possibility. But time does not offer the same chances twice. She ran a fingertip under the edge and opened it carefully. The handwriting met her like a voice. She had not heard that voice in decades, but the curves and angles of his letters were as familiar as a face you recognize from the shape of its shadow. She read without sound at first, tracing the lines with her eyes. "I never stopped waiting for you. I thought time might bring us back together. If it didn't, know that I loved you, always." She let the words sit there between them. The nurse did not look away. She did not speak or offer a tissue or tilt her head with practiced sympathy. She did the kindest thing. She allowed the moment to be as large as it needed to be. When Mrs. Carter did speak, her voice sounded different, like it had moved one step closer to where it had wanted to be all along. He thought I left him. I thought he left me. Imagine how much living went on inside that one misunderstanding. The nurse nodded. People carry whole decades inside sentences that never got said. He told me once that he wrote you another letter and never mailed it. He didn't know where to send it by then. He kept it in a book. She almost smiled. He was always tucking important things into ordinary places. That was how he hid the parts of himself he didn't know how to share. She folded the letter and unfolded it again. Does it say anything else? The nurse asked gently. It says he hoped I found a way to be happy, even if it was without him. It says if I ever read this, he wanted me to know there was nothing I needed to forgive. And then a line in smaller script, almost as if he had written it to himself. I am trying to be the kind of man who could have stayed. She read it twice. The room felt different after that, as if the walls had moved a fraction of an inch farther apart. They sat together in a quiet that no longer pressed against the ribs. The nurse spoke eventually, not to direct or instruct, but to make room. He used to hum in the kitchen, she said, when he thought no one was listening. Always the same melody, like a promise he was keeping to himself. Mrs. Carter laughed softly, a sound not of amusement but of recognition. He hummed when he worked, she said. He said it kept his hands steady. The nurse looked down at the envelope, then up again with something like shyness. I should tell you one more thing. My name is Danielle. He named me for himself, I suppose. But when I was small, he said I was named for the bravest person he had known. He never said your name in that sentence, but I think he meant you. The words arrived like a second letter. She felt them find their place. The appointment itself had become a background event, like rain in a novel. Blood pressure numbers were taken and recorded. A new prescription was discussed. But those were the lighter threads. The stronger thread was the one running between two people who had never met until today and yet belonged to the same story. When the nurse stood, Mrs. Carter stood too. There was a moment when it seemed like they might reach for each other and then thought better of it, both understanding that some distances are bridged best by letting them be what they are. Thank you, Mrs. Carter said, not only for this, for carrying him forward. The nurse smiled in a way that looked like a photograph you keep on the refrigerator. He carried himself forward by loving you, she said. I only kept the box in order. Outside the exam room, the day looked ordinary from the windows, which is how most miracles look up close. She walked down the corridor feeling as if the floor had learned to hold her weight a little differently. The automatic doors opened with their small mechanical sigh and released her into light that was neither bright nor dim, a soft afternoon that allowed faces to be faces and not shapes. She did not hurry. People who are carrying something precious rarely do. On the sidewalk, she found a bench. She did not sit because she was tired. She sat because the day had changed shape, and the body needs a minute to agree with the heart. The letter lay across her palm. She didn't read it again. She simply let it rest there, as if it could gather sunlight. A couple passed, speaking quietly about something they would later forget. A child held a paper cup like a trophy. An older man adjusted his hat and glanced up at the sky to see if the weather had decided anything. Life continued at its ordinary pace, the way rivers keep moving even when no one notices. She thought of the first time she met Daniel. It had not been at a sunset or on a dramatic corner, but at a small table where neither of them could find the right change for their coffee, and they laughed because sometimes the world seems to conspire to make strangers look at each other. She thought of the day she moved into the apartment with its stubborn window that never closed properly in winter, and the way he had stuffed folded cloth between the frame and the glass while humming under his breath. She thought of the argument, not as a scene with lines she could quote, but as a feeling, a heat that gathered behind the eyes when you are young and mistake certainty for strength. How quickly people say never when they are frightened. How many years fit into that one word when no one thinks to open it back up? She stood again, not because anything had been decided, but because the body is a faithful student of time. On the way home, she noticed things she had not bothered to notice on the way in. The particular way a tree leaned toward the street as if listening. The sound of a bus door folding shut like a book that had reached the end of a chapter. The face of a woman in a window who looked for a second like someone she had once known and then changed back into a stranger. At her front door, she paused and touched the place where the paint had thinned from years of hands. She did not know whether it had been hers or someone else's that smoothed it down to this faint shine. But she liked the idea that houses remember touch. Inside, the quiet greeted her without its usual weight. The room had the same furniture, the same framed photo on the mantel, the same braided rug that never lay perfectly flat at the corner. It was not a new room, but she was not the same person who had left it this morning. She set her purse down and placed the letter on the table, with a care that might have looked excessive if you did not know how paper can contain a life. She made tea without thinking about each step, the water, the kettle, the mug. And while she waited for it to steep, she looked at the photograph. In it, Daniel was younger than he had any right to be, his hair a little too long, his eyes squinting at a light neither of them could remember later if it had been the sun or a lamp. She placed the letter next to the frame, and for a moment, there they were together, an image from before and words from after, meeting on the surface of a table in a room that had learned to hold such meetings. She did not cry in the way movies suggest, all at once and dramatically. Tears came and went like small weather. She wiped them away and then let them arrive again. When the kettle sighed, she poured the tea and carried it to the chair by the window. This was the chair she sat in when the house felt too large, the one that had learned the shape of her. Afternoon light made a gentle ladder on the floorboards. Outside, a neighbor walked a slow dog who stopped to consider the same patch of air 3 times. She smiled without meaning to. There is a kind of forgiveness that does not need words. It happens when the world hands you a truth that rearranges the furniture of your memory. She did not need to forgive Daniel for leaving if he had not truly left. She did not need to forgive herself for staying if staying had been an act of courage in a year that asked too much of both of them. What she needed, perhaps, was simply to recognize that love had remained in the room even after the people left it. Some loves do that. They learn the layout. They wait. She unfolded the letter once more and noticed something she had missed the first time. A line written at the bottom in his smaller, careful hand. If you ever read this, promise me one thing. Keep a chair for someone new. She let the sentence sit there until it warmed up. It was not a command or a wish spoken into a well. It was a simple request from a man who had learned, maybe too late, that love is less a grand announcement and more a series of small chairs offered to other people's days. That evening, when the light had faded to the color of old linen and the house had settled into the soft creaks it made before sleep, she opened a small box she hadn't touched in years. Inside were things that had once felt necessary and later felt like clutter. A ticket stub with the ink faded to near invisibility. A ribbon from a gift she could not remember opening. A key that belonged to a lock no one owned anymore. She added the envelope to the box and closed the lid. Then she changed her mind, opened it again, and took the letter back out. Not yet, she told herself. Some things need air. The next morning, she woke with the quiet confidence that belongs to people who have decided something, even if they cannot name it yet. She put on a sweater she had always thought was a little too bright and left the house earlier than usual. At the corner, she turned toward the place with small tables and the hum of people who keep each other company by existing in the same room. A neighborhood coffee shop can be a kind of church when you need it to be. She ordered nothing elaborate. She has never been that kind of person, and chose a table near the window where the light softened faces. She did not take out the letter. She didn't need to. It was with her the way a song is with you long after the radio turns off. A man about her age stood beside her table, looking uncertain in the way people do when they are about to ask if a seat is taken. She moved her hand slightly over the chair across from her, the small gesture that translates to welcome in any language. He thanked her, sat, and for a few minutes, they performed the ordinary miracle of two strangers sharing silence without making it heavy. Eventually, he nodded toward the window and said something about the weather pretending to choose a season. She agreed, and that was enough to open the smallest door. They did not exchange life stories or the names of their children or the inventory of their aches. They talked about the coffee that was too hot and the pastry that was better than it looked, and the way some days are kinder than others for reasons you cannot learn. When he stood to leave, he touched the back of the empty chair lightly, as if grateful to it, and she thought of Daniel's line at the bottom of the letter. Keep a chair for someone new. On the way home, she stopped by the library. Not because she needed a book, she had several at home with bookmarks resting like flags, but because libraries are the opposite of silence. They are rooms full of voices that learned how to wait politely. She sat for a while in the reading area where the light came down like a thoughtful hand. A child laughed from somewhere she could not see. A woman whispered to a man about a recipe as if it might escape if they spoke too loudly. When she left, she did not feel cured of anything. She felt companioned, which is sometimes better. At her front door, she paused again, the way she had the day before, and this time when she entered the house, she did something small and decisive. She moved the chair by the window just a little closer to the other chair that no one had used in years. Not so close that they touched. She was not trying to erase the shape of the life she had lived, but close enough that conversation could find them if it came. She set 2 cups on the shelf where she usually kept one. She put a second towel on the bathroom rail. These were not superstitions. They were invitations. That night, she slept differently. Sleep is not always rest. Sometimes it is just the body holding still while the heart continues its work. But this time, her rest felt like water placed gently on a table, steady, without ripples. In the morning, she read the letter again, not to wring more meaning from it, but the way you look out a window you love, because it reminds you the world is larger than your room. Days passed and arranged themselves into a pattern that did not feel like a schedule so much as a rhythm. She visited the coffee shop on certain mornings, not every day, because hunger is easier to live with than need. She went to the library without borrowing anything, just to sit in the presence of other people's sentences. She learned the nurse's schedule and sometimes left a small note at the front desk that said nothing more than "Thank you for yesterday," even when yesterday had been last week. She bought a second mug with a little blue line around the rim because imperfect patterns are truer than perfect ones. She spoke aloud occasionally to the photograph, not because she believed it could hear her, but because some words belong in the air. One afternoon, near the hour when light learns to lower its voice, the phone rang. It was not a wrong number, or a survey, or a machine telling her something she did not want to buy. It was the nurse. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I found something in my father's things. I think it belongs with you." She brought it by that evening in an envelope larger than the first, the formal kind that used to hold documents. On the outside, in Daniel's handwriting, was a single line: "For the day I finally say her name out loud again." Inside was a photograph she had never seen. It was not romantic. They were not kissing or framed by a sunset. They were standing in that small apartment near the window that never closed properly, both of them laughing at something just out of reach of the camera. The photograph had creases at the corners where someone's thumb had worried it, and a faint ring where a cup had rested too close. On the back, he had written a date and then scratched it out and written only, "Keep this where you can see it when you're brave." She did not cry. She did not need to. Some gifts arrive already understood. She placed the new photograph beside the old one and then did something she had not planned to do. She moved the second chair a little closer still and sat down in it. The room recalibrated itself in the quiet way rooms do when you change the position of a single object, and suddenly it all makes sense. She looked toward the window where the last light made a narrow path across the floor and thought, almost with surprise, "I am not waiting anymore." She was not waiting for Daniel. She was not waiting for the past to return wearing a new coat. She was not waiting for a miracle. She was living inside the one she already had. There is nothing miraculous in this story, and that is what makes it a miracle. A life can turn not on fireworks or grand gestures, but on the smallest hinges you hardly notice. A nurse who whispers a name, a letter that waits in the dark, a second photograph that remembers you more accurately than you remembered yourself. A chair moved a few inches closer to another chair. A morning when you put out 2 cups because it feels right to make room. Love does not vanish when time passes. It leaves traces that wait, patient and steady, until you are ready to see them. And if you have ever wondered late at night whether you too were forgotten, the answer is no. If you have stood in your own kitchen with your hand on a drawer you do not need to open, thinking of a person you could not keep, the answer is no. If you have walked into your living room and the quiet met you at the door and you thought, this is too much to carry alone, the answer is no. Love leaves chairs in rooms and notes in pockets and names that echo in places you did not expect. It leaves letters in envelopes and photographs that crease where fingers rest. It leaves you, and it comes back for you. So listen for it, in a word, in a letter, in a voice that says your name the way you remember it, in a memory that returns when you least expect it, in the gentle habit of making space for someone new. That is where hope begins.